Okay, okay. Take your seats. Settle down. Settle down. Welcome to the Road to Concord 101. This class is about all things connected to the path of history leading from Mount Sinai to Lexington Green and the individual liberty and freedom of man. If you're in the wrong place, feel free to get up and go see the registrar's office about dropping this class, preferably before you meet the professor. In the event you do not already know this, your professor is Joe Bakanovic, and he has a bit of a reputation on campus. He is most definitely an acquired taste, but if you can learn to tolerate him, he will make you better at defending your position, whatever it may be. I'm T.A. Charlie. I'm here to help the professor, but more importantly, you. We encourage you to take notes, and if you have questions, feel free to call. If you'd like the number, please email us. You can also post your questions in the comments, and we'll get the professor's attention. Part of my job is to let you know a little bit about your professor. As I said earlier, the professor has that bit of a reputation on campus. Not all of it is good. Let me help explain a little with a story about how I came to be the professor's TA. I was invited to attend one of his classes. My first impression of the professor was that he was an egotistical, narcissistic know-it-all. My intent after only a few minutes of class was never to attend another class with this professor. But after class, Professor Joe came up to me and thanked me for my class participation and told me that my perspective was valuable, and he asked me to keep coming to class. This actually took me back a little. To me, he seemed inconsistent. What was I to do? I decided to continue coming to his classes. As I did, I actually started doing what he does encourage students to do. Check behind him and see if what he is teaching is actually correct. I have done this over and over again, and generally speaking, I found what he teaches to be backed by sound, valid, and rational arguments from reputable sources. When I have challenged him and provided a sound, valid, and rational argument in opposition to his current position, he immediately changed his position and thanked me for correcting him. Why do I tell you all this? Professor Joe is a little rough around the edges, especially in the way he delivers his content. But if you stick with him and listen to what he teaches and then go and check his sources, you will likely find, as I did, he will help you better understand the world around you and help you to think better and hopefully to live better. At least that is our hope. One last note. This class builds on itself. Therefore, it is important to attend class regularly. We will not always have time to go over previously covered material. If you are new, we suggest you watch our older classes. We've created playlists to help you with those things we feel are of special importance. Now, let's get started.
Good morning. Welcome to the Road to Concord. Today is Tuesday, October 21st, 2025, and I am, thanks to Mr. Spikes, I've been dubbed the professor. Not really, just a layman patriot scholar. How's that work? This is going to be part 4 in a show series that we've been doing on the extrapolation of universal morality. What is natural law? Does it really exist? Et cetera, et cetera. We started with the comment Descartes made, I think, therefore I am. And I've extrapolated all of that now in the last 3 shows. We're not going to go back and go over everything from show 1. So if you missed some of that, go back and do that. It should be a special folder for this series on Rumble. And I don't know if Charlie's put it up on YouTube or not, but Charlie's not with us today. We've got Natasha running the board, so y'all be nice to her. She'll snipe you and you'll be gone. She was mean to me before the show. She was. And before we get going, I just got to share something with you. I was just happily entertaining myself, singing "They're coming to take me away, ho ho, hee hee, ha ha, to the funny farm." And she chimed in and she said, "They keep threatening to do that, but they never do." It's almost like she wants to get rid of me. Yes?
Hey, I'm just fire's hot, water's wet.
She's just stating facts. Okay, yeah, that's true. I keep scaring them off. Okay. I'm going to hope that you saw yesterday's show. Yesterday's show was on the rule of law versus the rule by law. And it is in conjunction with what we're doing here on morality. The rule of law, it's an ideal. Okay, we discussed that yesterday. It's a target for which we shoot. It's set as when you do the rule of law, the law is supposedly the ultimate authority. It should be considered to be above and outside of human control. Unfortunately, it isn't. And that's why you have rule by law. That's because man is the ultimate source of authority under rule by law. And if all you do is reason out the rule of law under man's authority, you're going to end up with Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan. And that's justification of tyranny. He uses nice language that sounds good, but in the end, his reasoning will lead to tyranny. And once you're in a tyrannical government, he does not allow you any option to object or to claim injury or seek redress. So under the rule by law, or even under the rule of law extrapolated sheerly by logic, a la most libertarians, the law is not above or outside human control. Therefore, the rule of law only works if and when the ultimate authority is above or outside of human control. Otherwise, the law remains a rule by law. So anything that man does, if it's just man, if he's appealing to logic and reason and all of that, it'll always be rule by law. Therefore, even if we were to deny the existence of a creator, it would be necessary to create him. So even if you're an atheist, it's necessary to create a creator, to invent one. Why? Well, first of all, you're going to want to create you want to create the idea of a creator. And in this case, we already acknowledge that he exists. But we're assuming you're an atheist and you don't believe in God. You need to create a creator, and you also need to create a firm conviction in eternal rewards and punishments in an afterlife. Well, this is essentially Voltaire. If God did not exist, it would be necessary to create him. Well, why? Well, if you do that, you create an authority that is outside of and above human control. And you create an authority who is going to govern in the affairs of man and judge us in an eternal afterlife. You've given a reason for human beings to embrace that authority and that threat of eternal punishment. This also does not allow for a deist entity or deity. This has to be a creator who's actively involved in the affairs of man. Now, if we do not have a creator who is active and will judge human actions, without that, you can't have a claim to rights. There's no such thing as rights. There's only privileges granted by those in control. And if there are no rights, then there is no duty to others, only to the state, to the beast, if you understand, if you have ears to hear. So without a creator who in an afterlife, an eternal afterlife and judgment and punishment and rewards, there's no such thing as morality, only ethics. And I'm the one, I'm using the definitions that I have given as we've done this series. And I'll show you again why I say this. So ethics is subject to the constant and arbitrary change of man. That's why I call them ethics. There's no objective standard under ethics, under the rule of man. If man can change things whenever they want, there's no objective standard. There's no universal or eternal law, which is, that's how I defined morality. There's nothing by which to measure or judge other than that particular sovereign, or the government, whoever's in ruling. Well, if there's no measure to judge by, especially since you can't tell what the king is going or queen is going to do from one day to the next, or the government, there can be no justice, only the will of the state. So without a creator, these things such as morality and objective standards and justice, they don't exist. Because as long as right and wrong remains in the control of man, there are no rights, there are only privileges. There's no duty, there's only an obligation to the state. There are no standards by which to judge anything. Therefore, there can be no justice. Not in the sense that it's eternal to all people. In other words, at a given certain place and time with a different culture or society, under one government, slavery might be legal. In another, it might be illegal. But you can't consider either one of them immoral, because as long as it was legal, it's ethical. So if you're going to come along later and say it was a moral injustice, you have to have a creator who says that that's illegal, that's immoral. It has to be a law that's above and beyond yours. Otherwise, it's just might makes right. Well, as we destroy this notion of pinning morality and justice to a creator active and involved in the affairs of man, we continue to do this in our society. What we've created is moral relativism. And that's going to lead to a constant state of struggle between all involved, or all who are looking for control. And there's no foundation by which to base a claim of wrong or redress for other than the use of force. The only thing that you're left with in this world is the use of force. Now, under the rule of a creator, if there is a creator who is actively involved in human affairs and will judge us in an afterlife, these problems don't go away, but they do create an objective standard by which we can judge everything. And that creates morality. And that creates a universal sense of morality. Universal and eternal, applies to all moral agents everywhere at all times. And since you have a sense of morality, now you have a duty and an obligation to others and to the creator. And that gives us an objective standard by which we can create justice. We can do justice. And this would all be based on the individual, not a group or a collective. So this is all individual rights and liberties through a creator, at least depending on which creator you're going to go with. Now, if you ever peruse the Road to Concord's blog page, I have these posts I'm about to share with you are in flux. So you won't find them categorized. They're uncategorized at the moment. I'm reading now from one of the ones that's the founder's words, the essential role of religion in public life. You'd find that here at the top, original intent, Christian foundation, down here at the bottom. But I want to scroll down to a couple of things that Benjamin Franklin said. Let's find him real quick. L.A.S. Bedouet. All right, Dickinson Franklin. Benjamin Franklin expressed the thinking that I've been arguing for here. Remember, he's supposedly a deist. Our good friend on the show, Water Jug, Mr. William Holt, he first encountered me on Steve Nichols' radio show up in Valdosta, Georgia area. And he called in to insist that Franklin was a deist. And I told him to go check Franklin's words, not the history, not the historians. And Mr. Holt came back later, and to his great credit, one of the reasons I would call him a friend, he's intellectually honest. He came back and said, well, after going back and checking what Franklin said, not the historians, that, yeah, you're right. He's not a deist. Well, that doesn't make me anything special. I'm just faithfully representing what Franklin said. So here's one of the things he did. This is from the speech to the Constitutional Convention. This is while they are in the convention. It's about to fail. At this point in time, this is 28th June, 1787. The only reason we know about this is because Madison kept the notes on the convention. He wrote this down. The convention is almost ready to fail. The delegates are about ready to break up and go home. And Franklin stands up and he says, and he's addressing the president of the convention, which is Madison. He says, I've lived, sir, a long time. And the longer I live, the more convincing proof I see of this truth, capital T truth, that, and that's not my capital T, that was Madison wrote that God governs in the affairs of men. Well, that right there means that you're not a deist. And this is also where I get capital T truth from Madison's record of Franklin's words. That's where I first got the idea of capital T truth. Franklin continues, and if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? Now, he's paraphrasing, he's incorporating biblical teaching here about the sparrow. We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, he's talking about the Bible, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain who build it. I firmly believe this. And I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel, another biblical reference. We shall be divided by our little partial local interests. Our projects will be confounded, and we ourselves shall become a reproach and a byword down to future ages. Now, that's for those of you who know the Bible, the reproach and confound, that's Babel speak, Tower of Babel, all over right there. But this is not a deist. And he's saying that without active aid of a involved creator, that what they were trying to do is useless. Now, again from Franklin, in a letter to Ezra Stiles dated 9 March 1790, he says, you desire to know something of my religion. It is the first time I have been questioned upon it, but I cannot take your curiosity amiss, and shall endeavor in a few words to gratify it. Here is my creed. Again, notice how this is going to align with what I've been teaching here in this series. And notice this is not me getting this from Franklin this time. This is many paths to one truth. Franklin says, I believe in one God, the creator of the universe, that he governs by his providence. So whenever you see the founding fathers talking about providence and you say, well, that's just any generic God, that is not how Franklin or his compatriots, his peers, use that term. Providence is the acting, ruling, guiding hand of the single creator of the universe in human affairs. That's what he means by providence. He governs by his providence, that he ought to be worshiped, that the most acceptable service we render to him is doing good to his other children, that the soul of man is immortal and will be treated with justice in another life, respecting its conduct in this. These I take to be the fundamental points in all sound religion, and I regard them as you do in whatever sect I meet with them. Sect is the founding fathers' word for denomination. He is not talking about all religions. He's talking about Christianity or the religions of the Bible. He continued in this letter. He says, as to Jesus of Nazareth, my opinion of whom you particularly desire, I think his system of morals and his religion, as he left them to us, the best the world has ever saw or is likely to see. It's Benjamin Franklin. And he's telling us essentially the same things I've been telling you or trying to teach you. That's just me. I know everybody can disagree. Now let's put all of this together and let's see where we're at for a moment. I'm going to put this up here for us. This is our, if you remember, this is our rights bubbles. And in this case, it's just privilege bubbles, because we're going to be doing this without a creator. You have the will A and the will B. You have a privilege or a claim, a just claim to your life, your body, your labor, and the property through your labor. Those things that you make or gather or need to sustain yourself, that you acquire through your will as exercised by your body, which is defined as labor, through the things you do. So when two or more people are in relationship of some sort, or in a community, or in contact, and they're interacting, okay, that area where their claim to their life, body, and labor overlaps, That's where ethics would reside. My definition of ethics is the idea of right and wrong based on human reasoning, not necessarily that of a creator. So it's based in logic, whichever form of logic you want to use, whichever logical argument you're using. It's still subject to the whim and will and change and arbitrary application of the individual. So that's why I call it ethics. So it was ethical to have slaves in certain parts, and still ethical today in certain countries to have slaves. I would tell you it's immoral. In certain religions, it's ethical to kill people. It's not deemed as murder. I would tell you it's if you're going to unjustly kill an innocent individual who has done nothing wrong in a grand scheme of things, I call that murder. But under these religions, they define it as justified because you're either not human or you did violate some sort of religious teaching. There's nothing you can say about that. If you're going to be without a creator and you're just going to go with human logic, you cannot object. You can't. It's just might makes right. Okay? And in this case, that particular religion I'm thinking of is usually going to win that debate because you're going to not be willing to off with their heads and they're going to be happy to off with your head. And they will win, as they normally do in the grand scheme of things since that religion stepped onto the face of the planet. So here's where we have 4 or more, in this case, 4 people. And I kind of like this design because you can see that the ethics lives right there in the middle, but also there are different intersecting lines between person A, person B, or person A and D, person C and B, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're still without a creator. So that's ethics in my argument. It's not, it wouldn't be morality because as long as you're living under whoever the boss is and, your libertarian model or the king's model of what is and isn't right or wrong, the ethics is subject to change. We can change it according to however we want. We have no objective standard. So ethics is a subjective idea of what is right and wrong. I would argue that morality is an objective rule of what is right and wrong. Subjective does not necessarily apply to everybody. Objective would apply to every moral agent. Everybody to which morality applies. In this case, every human being. Now, if you throw a creator in there, now it's morality, in my way of thinking and reasoning. Because ethics, you can have one rule for one group in society and one for another. Like it's okay to be racist in our country now if you're black. And it's not okay to be racist. By definition, you're racist if you're white. And if you think that's not the case in this country, that has become the expressed standard of a great deal of our ruling class. Blacks can't be racist, and even if they are, that's okay. It's justified because of the past. But whites are racist by birth, which is itself racism. See, they've unpinned from any definition, but that's ethical. That's ethical to those people. And that's why you can't reason with them because you're in a might makes right fight. And you're working from a state of morality, an objective law that is outside and above human control. So you're not going to use might makes right to make these ethical, these people who are clinging to their arbitrary ethics. You can't win that fight with them. They're not using logic and reason. A lot of them are just using strict emotion. And that makes them irrational. And that's why I cited those 2 passages from the scriptures last week. It makes them nothing more than unthinking or irrational animals, good for nothing but to be led to the slaughter. They're not human beings, not in that sense. They're human animals. And without a creator, that's all we ever will be, are human animals. Once you have a creator, now you're something different. And that's why I differentiate, and that's how I differentiate between ethics and morality. Now, you're free to reject my argument, but I'm going to want, and I'm going to demand you give me a better one to replace mine. And I'm going to demand that your better argument address the issues I've brought up, which is going to include this. Without a creator, my claim to my natural rights is one. I'm one person. I claim my natural right. Your claim to your natural rights is one. But if I add all the other people's claims to their natural right, it could be infinity, however many people there are ever going to exist. Therefore, my claim to my natural rights is less than the other people's claim to their natural rights combined, because one is less than infinity. And that's how Spock gets to the needs of the many or the whole outweigh the needs of the few or the one. But that's a fallacy. Unless, of course, you're reasoning without a creator. Now, let me ask you something. How many people who reason this way are going to say, yeah, well, society said I should die, so I'm just going to go ahead and kill myself just for the good of society? Well, I believe Socrates did that, but he didn't believe in a creatorless world. He did believe in the creator. So how many atheists are going to agree that if you and I get together and we tell him or her that you're now our slave, it's for the good of us, our two wills outweigh your one? How many of them are going to agree to that? I don't know many or any. I've never encountered a libertarian that would agree with that would agree with willingly enslaving themselves just because we decided that, we got a vote and they lost and they're now our slave. Well, that's because born into each and every one of us is the instinctive understanding that there is such a thing as morality, and that it is wrong to force your will onto another and to trample on their exercise of their free will. We know that. We instinctively know that. That's why I reject this idea right here that there's no creator, which leaves us with this. My claim to my natural rights is infinite because it is mine and mine alone, and it goes on forever and ever, amen, as long as my will exists. There are no limits to my claim to my will, my life, my body, etc., outside of that of the creator. What limits the creator puts on them, those are the only ones that exist. Now, I happen to believe in the Bible, the creator in the Bible. He, Yahweh, has limited everything but my will. So at least I have a natural claim to my will, that the creator has said that he will not trample because he chose not to. So let's just say a natural claim to my will, if you want, or natural rights. It's infinite. So is yours. Now, let's add up everybody else's claim to their will. Well, that's infinity. Infinite plus infinite is infinite. Therefore, my claim to my natural rights is equal to everybody else's combined. In other words, society can't gang up on me under this ideal, this paradigm. And that's because infinity equals infinity. My claim to my will is just as great as an entire group of people's claim to theirs. That creates a lot of problem in our world because a lot of people don't want to accept this. It's an earthly way to think that this is better. Oh, well, look, 1,000 people, it's more beneficial that we take care of them rather than you. Don't you know anything? It's better that one man die for his nation than to lose the whole nation on account of what he's doing. So I guess we should have assassinated Martin Luther King earlier, right? That's that type of thinking that led to that's the type of thinking that leads to assassinating Charlie Kirk or trying to assassinate President Trump. So if you can justify assassination for the betterment of a larger group, well, then you're creatorless. Your highest authority is you. That makes you godless because you're not a god. I can give you that much right now, and I have no problem telling you that. You're not a god. So it's going to leave me with something else before we go to the break. I'm going to go here now. It's another page from a blog post from the Road to Concord, extrapolating our natural rights. And I want to show you something. Again, my thinking was guided by the founding fathers. This is a quote from Thomas Jefferson. The right to use a thing comprehends a right to the means necessary to its use, and without which it would be useless. So I've used this on people. You have a right to own a car, right? Well, yeah, Joe. Well, then you have a right to drive it on the public highway. Well, that's a privilege, Joe. Thanks for playing. Wrong. I have a right to drive on it. Well, you need a driver's license, Joe. Wrong. Well, then how can I protect other people? Well, there are no guarantees about that. And trying to make sure everybody knows how to drive, that's the rule of control. That's arbitrary. Say, well, you shouldn't be allowed to speed. Wrong. Those rules are not meant to be used the way they are now. Those are supposed to mean for orderly flow of traffic and the determination of liability in the event of an accident. But now we use them for control and revenue generation. I shouldn't need a license because you're using that as ID. All of this is what happens when men rule arbitrarily. That's ruled by law. But if I have a right to buy a car and the roads are public, I should have a right to drive on those roads without needing a driver's license, without having to register my car. Shouldn't have to do any of that. Now, I can choose to do these things, but I shouldn't be forced to do it by the government. Comment on the board from Natasha. You think this argument would work at the DMV? No. No, because the DMV is part of a totalitarian system. But this way, if I'm driving and I haven't learned how to drive and I have an accident, well, then the rules of the road will determine liability. And if I'm found to be at fault, especially through negligence, I shouldn't be put in jail. I should be forced to make good on something. And let's say I end up killing somebody because I'm driving under the influence. I should not go to jail for that. I should now become an indentured servant to that family for the rest of my life. Because I took somebody from them, my life should now be forfeit to theirs, and I should be forced to work for them. Other than that, maybe I should be executed. Executed for an accident, Joe? Yes. In that case, yes. Because you willingly and wantonly put other people's lives in danger, knowing that there is a high probability that you are going to injure or kill somebody, and you did it indifferently. You didn't care. You put yourself above them. They have a right to self-defense. The only way to defend yourself from somebody who has shown that they are willing to drive under the influence is to remove that person from society. That's a natural law, natural rights argument under the Bible, folks. That's morality. But we've come so far from that, we can't tolerate that anymore. Jefferson also says, and this is an illegal argument from 1770, under the law of nature, all men are born free. Everyone comes into the world with a right to his own person, which includes the liberty of moving and using it as his own will. This is what is called personal liberty, and it gives him by the author of nature because necessity for his own sustenance. In other words, you have a right to your body, your life, and your labor because it's necessary to sustain your will. Same argument I've been making. He got to that before me, but independently of me. I had this argument before I stumbled across that quote. All right, I'm going to come back to this after the break. It's bottom of the hour break. It's a 3-minute break, Natasha. If you'll go ahead and play that now, we'll see you in 3 minutes, folks. Okay, welcome back. Before we get going again, I've got a little housekeeping to do. First of all, last week I made an appeal for any of you who felt led to do so to help us buy some binders to keep all my printed notes in for our studies. One of you was gracious enough to actually pay for 3 of them, and holy cow, I didn't expect to get all 3. So, not to call that person out, but we thank them. They know who they are, and we know that they're listening today. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Also, we've got a comment on the board from Aaron Spikes. He says, when tyranny becomes law, resistance becomes duty. Only under the system of morality where you recognize an active and involved deity. If it's under just the government, a la Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan, then no, you have no duty to resist. You have a duty to obey, even if it's tyranny. That's the point of that. That was Hobbes's whole argument. And that's why our founding fathers went with Locke. Locke is opposite. Locke would agree with you, Mr. Spikes. So let us get back to where I left off. We're still dealing with Thomas Jefferson. And you libertarians, I want you to pay attention. Hear me, hear me. This is not my words. This is Thomas Jefferson about to yak at you. A right of property in movable things is admitted before the establishment of government. In other words, yeah, you got a right to those things that are movable because you've either acquired them or made them through your own labor. A separate property in lands, not till after that establishment. In other words, you have no right to your intellectual property or to your physical land, your house, your farm. You have no right to that. So if you quit paying property taxes on that, they have a right to take that away from you because you don't own the earth. You didn't create the earth. What your taxes are is you paying into the system to maintain the system that allows you to treat that piece of the earth as your personal property. So this idea that I bought my property and now I still have to pay taxes on it is theft, stuff it. You're trying to go back under the rule of might makes right. You own the world. You're not a god. You didn't create the world. Jefferson understands that. He's explaining it. He says a separate property in lands, not until after. The right to movables is acknowledged by all the hordes of Indians surrounding us. Yet by no one of them has a separate property in lands been yielded to individuals. He who plants a field keeps possession till he has gathered the produce, and after which one has as good a right as any other to occupy it. Does that sound familiar? I didn't get that from Jefferson. I got that on my own. And then found out later after the fact that, holy cow, Jefferson and I use the exact same many paths to the one capital T truth. Jefferson continues, government must be established and laws provided before lands can be separately appropriated and their own protest in his possession or protected in his possession. Till then, the property is in the body of the nation, and they, or their chief as trustee, must grant them to individuals and determine the conditions of the grant, a la royal land grants. You'll find that tomorrow. So there's another one here by Benjamin Franklin. This is in a letter to Robert Morris, dated 25 December 1783. He's going to say, all the property that is necessary to a man for the conservation of the individual and the propagation of the species is his natural right, which no one can justly deprive him of. But all property superfluous to such purposes is the property of the public, who, by their laws, have created it, and who may, therefore, by other laws, dispose of it, whenever the welfare of the public shall demand such disposition. He that does not like civil society on these terms, let him retire and live among savages. He can have no right to the benefits of society who will not pay his club towards the support of it. Let me explain, Lucci. And for those of you who aren't old enough, let me explain this to you, Lucy. All the property you need to sustain your life and your family's lives and to perpetuate the species, take care of your children, that cannot be denied you. But as soon as you have more than it is necessary to do that, it was created by society in a free governing, free society like ours, self-governing, and therefore society has a right over it. All of you people who think my corporation, my private property, wrong, swing and a miss, according to both Franklin and Jefferson, if you take Jefferson's other writings into account, because the corporation was created by the laws of the people. Therefore, the people have control over those corporations. They are not a natural entity. They are an artificial entity, and the people can do as they wish with that corporation and your property if they want to. Hey, Bill Gates, Mr. Soros, all that money you've got, you were able to acquire that great wealth because of the laws of the people. So if we so deem that your increased wealth will better fit the people or has become a detriment to the people have the right to take that from you. Well, Joe, that sounds a lot like socialism. No. It sounds like if you're going to have great wealth, don't use it against the people that provided the system by which you acquired it. If you do, they have a right to take it from you, not everybody else that has a great wealth. Ergo, taxing the rich more is not justified by Franklin. Taking the money away from people who are using it to destroy the nation is. And it's not theft because you acquired it because the people allowed you to, created a system that allowed you to acquire it. Ergo, if you cannot use it responsibly, the people have a right to take everything not necessary to your survival. Not my words. Founding fathers. Natasha said, who should be allowed to sell property rights to others? Well, if you're paying your taxes, you have the right to sell that property to somebody else because the tax system allows you to treat that property as though it was yours. That's why we pay property taxes. That's the whole point. So, my libertarian friends, if you don't like this system, Franklin told you what the remedy is. Gather your movable crap and get your butt out into the wilderness and get away from civilized society. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, just real quick, I guess I'm thinking like, you see the plots of land and they have the for sale signs.
Yes.
Like, does that fall under all this too?
Yes. Because, okay.
I
So if I wanted to sell my property right now, I should have the right to sell it because I'm paying the property taxes. I'm paying for the system that creates a means by which I can treat this section of the earth as my property. I don't own it, but society has been created to allow me to treat it as though I do. So long as I pay what Franklin called my fair club to the maintenance of the system. So I can now sell it to you if I want to. If you want to buy it and we arrange a fair price, I can sell it to you. Now you have to start paying the property taxes to maintain the system that protects your right to use the property as yours. The moment you quit paying those taxes, you are no longer, you're saying, I don't want to be part of this system anymore. Well, that property is no longer going to be yours. It's going to come back to the state, and the state will sell it back off to somebody else, which is exactly what Franklin and Jefferson were saying.
Right.
Make sense?
I guess I'm just really curious because I notice a lot of properties around here where they're basically just like wild trees and stuff growing.
Yeah, but people
They're not
own them.
developed, but okay.
People or corporations own them. At one point,
Okay.
The St. Joe Paper Company owned huge sections of the land. Well, why did they own it? Because the system that we live in allowed a corporation to buy up that much of the property. Now, why were they allowed to keep it? They were doing nothing with it. Oh, no. They were growing pine trees for the propagation of making paper. So they were using that land to operate their business. Now, when they quit doing, they quit getting into paper, then they became a real estate agency and they started selling it off. They have the right to do that as long as they're paying their taxes.
Yeah, I was just curious about that specific way.
Okay, we have a question on the board from Marianne. It says, I have a question. So if I am Yahweh's steward of the earth, does that not come into this? Yes, it does. Let's say you're living in ancient Israel and you're a member of one of the tribes, and the tribes has been given a portioned part of the earth. These are your tribal lands. You're allowed to sell your part, your allotment of that part of the tribe, because everybody in the tribe was given land except the Levites. So you've got your own little plot and you run onto hard times and you sell it. You're allowed to do that. But the price According to Yahweh, the price had to be set according to the number of years left before the Jubilee. And, that's every 7 years and every 50. Because at the end of 7 years, that land came back to you. And then you could sell it again if you had to. And that's because the land ultimately belonged to Yahweh. And he set the system by which it was going to be used. We don't do that necessarily here, but in this country, you can declare bankruptcy every 7 years. Where did they get the idea for that? The Jubilee. So you can erase your debts every 7 years. And that's what happened in Israel. All debt was erased every 7 years. And every 50, everything had to come back to where it belonged. And everything was erased, is set standard again. You started all over, all possessions, all debts, everything. This is also in the writings for how to handle inheritance by the founding fathers. They wanted you to, if you had children, you could not give everything you owned to one child. You couldn't put your inheritance into a trust like some people do today, because they said that makes the dead inherit the earth. And they didn't believe in that, because a trust means your will survives past your body's longevity. And you're exerting your will over the people who are alive when you're in the grave. So what they said you would do under a just government is, okay, I'm Rockefeller and I die. I have to give my inheritance equally to all my children. So if I have 4 children, I divide it up 4 ways. The thinking, according to the founding fathers, and they're correct, the thinking is, unless one of those 4 children is as brilliant as daddy was at making money, that money is going to be squandered and it'll go back into society in general. What Reagan might call trickle down. And that's how you dealt with injustices. And that's part of how the Bible works too. It's why our lifespan has been shortened, so that tyrants can only live so long. So if you have amassed great wealth, we should not allow you to put it into a trust. You should have to give it to your heirs equally. And we shouldn't tax it. It's already been taxed. Shouldn't have to do that. But if those heirs are spendthrifts and they're just luxury, livers, and they have no talent to maintain it or preserve it, then they'll squander it. It'll be gone. And other people will buy up the physical assets and put them to good use. That's how this system is supposed to work. At least the system the founding fathers tried to design. And they used the scriptures as their guide. We don't do that anymore. And the farther we get from that system, the more trouble we have for that reason. So I want to extrapolate what if there are no heirs? There's usually an heir of some sort, but if not, and this is one of the reasons this is why the Bible is so concerned with heirs. So you have somebody to give your stuff to, but if you don't, you can still choose who to give it to at that point, because you have no natural heirs. But it's not like you should be allowed to turn it into a trust. Like when Ted Turner dies, he owns half of Wyoming, and Wyoming is going to become unusable because he put all of that into a living trust, and he's going to make it so nobody else can do anything with it in perpetuity. Well, Jefferson's generation would say, oh, Bullock's on that, and his will would be no good. It would be null and void, his trust. They didn't allow those things. So let's go here. This is just a partial of your natural rights under a creator. Under morality. Shouldn't it go back to Yahweh, who then is that? In the system of Israel, it did go back to Yahweh, Marianne, but in our system, we don't have a Yahweh, we have a government that's supposed to be ruled according to the laws of Yahweh. So it would be like going back to the Commonwealth of Israel before the king was established. And since we do not have tribes that allot the land, it would have to just go back to the government in general. And that's how that happened early in our government. The government had all of the frontier land and they apportioned it. They would grant it to people free, or they'd sell it very, very cheap. And that's how you got your 40 acres and a mule. They just granted that to people so that it would encourage them to fill out into the land and make the land productive. So that's how that worked. All right. You have a natural right. This is under a creator. You have a right to your will because the creator gives it to you. Okay, that means you have a right to your life when you come into existence, because you need your life to sustain. Well, that's how you sustain your body. You have a right to your body. You have a right to your life. You have property in them because that's how your life sustains your body. Your body is how you exercise your will. So the exercise of your will through your body is your labor. You have a right to your labor. Your labor and how you use it gives you a right to property. Now you have property in your body, you have property in your will, but you also have property in however you use your labor. You create a right to that property by using your labor. You either gather something that previously wasn't gathered, or you create something that previously wasn't created. Or in the case of cultivating a field, you turn the field into a usable piece of property for the purpose of cultivating and growing a crop. And it's your right to that field so long as your labor is perpetually imparted into it. Where Jefferson said, as soon as you're no longer growing a crop, it's no longer your field to keep. The Indians even recognize this, the Native Americans. So what if I have several fields? I live in the South. I plant one crop, I grow it, I harvest it, and I immediately start getting ready to plant another crop. Well, I'm still putting my labor into that field, so I retain the right to use it, so long as I'm actively growing on it. I have a right to my conscience, which essentially is an extension of your will. It's your decisions. That's the things that you decide in your life, what you're going to believe, what you're going to hold to. So I have a right to express my conscience. That's freedom of speech, not freedom of symbolic speech. Burning a flag is not speech, it's an action. Definitions matter here. And having a right to speak does not mean having a right to be heard. Having a right to speak does not mean that I have a right to be free from the consequences of that speech. I can say something offensive, and you have a duty not to necessarily assault me. But if I say, hey, let's all gang up and kill so-and-so, now you have a right to defend yourself against me because I advocated an action that would harm you and trample your rights. I have a right to associate. All right. This is where we're going to start getting a little difficult. Racism's illegal and it's ugly and it's immoral and blah, blah. Yeah, and I would agree if you define racism correctly. When racism becomes a integral part of public policy and it finds its way into government and it is somehow enforced by society, even if it's not part of the law, let's say that just everybody, all businesses just we don't serve Polacks. Okay, I'm Polish, so we'll pick on Polacks. No Polacks allowed. Okay, if that's societal wide, and if I say, if you decide, okay, well, I like Polacks, I'm going to serve Polacks, and you say, okay, Polacks are allowed here, and everybody else teams up on you and harms you in some active way, they start attacking your business and they smash your windows or they set it on fire. This is institutional bigotry. That's slavery, but usually it finds its way into the law. So let's just for this purpose say that if it's in the law, the government upholds this based on race or anything else, ethnicity, that's slavery. But if I'm just bigoted and, I don't like Polacks just because they're Polish, or I don't like Irishmen just because they're Irish, or you don't like Jews just because they're Jews or Muslims, that's bigotry. You have a natural right to be a bigot. And anybody that wants to get on you for that and try to force you against your will, they violate the law, the natural law, not you. You have a right to be a bigot. In fact, certain types of bigotry are preferred, are necessary. So if you're anti-pedophile, you're a bigot, a racist, and we got to do something. I got a little news flash for you, boys and girls. I'm going to be anti-pedophile to the day I die. But that's bigotry by definition. If I'm anti-murder, I'm bigoted against murderers. If I'm anti-rapist, I'm bigoted against rapists. So bigotry is not necessarily a moral wrong or an evil. Now, if I'm bigoted against somebody because of the color of their skin, yeah, that's wrong. But if I'm bigoted against a culture, and it just so happens that the majority of that culture is of a certain skin type, that does not make me a bigot based on skin color. I'm bigoted against that culture. And that's not necessarily a moral wrong. If there's a culture that believes that every time the lights go out, it's justified to go loot the local store, grocery store, or department store because, they're rich and they're oppressing me. That's right. Well, I'm going to be bigoted against that culture, and ain't nothing wrong with my bigotry. It's totally in line with the worldview I've been describing. What I'm actually bigoted against is a group of people that justify lawlessness and the trampling of rights of other people. That's what I'm bigoted against. Now, if I come along, you or somebody else comes along and says, you're just bigoted against the color of the people doing it. No, had nothing to do with them. It was their actions. I'm bigoted against their actions. So you come along and you say the government is going to force my private business that pays its taxes to make a cake for somebody I don't agree with, a religious practice on religious principles or right of conscience. In this case, our cake maker with the rainbow jihad. They didn't refuse to make birthday cakes for LGBT people or anything else, just wedding cakes. Just a wedding cake. They have a right to do that. They have every right in the world to do that. And it's not racist, and that's not hate. That's the right of conscience and the right of association, which gets us to the right of contract. I have a right to enter into an agreement with another free will. I am into a free will agreement with society. I pay my taxes. My little bakery is allowed to make cakes whichever way I want. I can set the rules for who I will and will not serve. So I'm not going to make cakes for Polacks, period. You're going to say, well, society, Franklin says society has a right to force you to do that. Not in this case. Not unless I'm a corporation. What? If I'm doing business as a sole proprietor, then that property is mine. It's not public property any more than your home would be. Now, if you incorporate yourself, your home now becomes a form of public property because the people created the structure, the corporate structure under which you now own that property. You're not paying taxes to own the property as personal property. You're paying taxes to own it as corporate property. And corporations always have stockholders, no matter how many they are. And as soon as you have more than one person in there, you no longer have personal private property. It may be a partnership, but it's still, because of the way it was structured under a corporation, it is still owned by part of the public. It's a conceptual thing that's very important to understand. But now if my cake company, my little cake shop, it's just mine, I'm the one running it. It's my business. I'm an LLC or a DBA doing business as. Well, that's just the same as my house. It's not incorporated. I don't have shareholders. I don't have a partner. I can tell Polacks, you're not allowed here. You have no redress. But now under a corporation, yeah, the government should be allowed to come in and tell a corporation if that's what they want to do. Yeah, that's because it's public property. The corporation is a public entity. But as long as I'm existing in a society that allows you to own private property as your own, so long as you pay the taxes and support the system, and I'm not a corporation, then I have the right to tell certain people I don't want to contract with you. So now let's say I own an apartment complex. I built it. It's mine. No owners, no corporation, just an LLC, limited liability corporation or whatever company, limited liability company. And I say, I don't want Polacks living here. I should be allowed to do that. I should, because I'm running it as my private property. But now I say I've got 3 apartment complexes, and it's going to benefit me to incorporate. So I incorporate. Well, now the public can say through their laws, because they created the corporate structure, they can say, well, you're going to have to let Polacks live there. Well, I don't want to. Well, then don't incorporate. Well, then I'm going to pay a lot of higher taxes. Sucks to be you. You're the one that's wanting to be a bigot. Sucks to be you. Tough. Suck it up. Hopefully this is making sense to everybody. Finally, you have a natural right to defend all of the above. To defend it. Actively defend it. You don't have a right for vigilante justice after the fact. But if somebody is threatening your life, trying to harm your body, steal the products of your labor, damage or harm your property, Property necessary to sustain your life and your family. As Franklin said, you have a right to defend it, up to and including lethal force, if necessary. Say, well, Joe, just because they're going to burn down your cake shop, how do you think I make my living? How, if you take my cake shop, how, well, you got insurance? Maybe not necessarily. See, that's another thing. The government forces you to insure, or the bank who owns it, that owns the mortgage. The bank can, because that's part of the deal of right to contract with the bank to borrow money. They can say, well, you're going to have to insure it. But what if it's paid off? Okay, I don't have insurance. And you're going to burn down my cake store because I wouldn't sell you, you're a Polak and I wouldn't sell you a cake. You're going to come burn it down. I got a right to stop you, if necessary, to kill you, because you're threatening my ability to sustain my life, the life of my spouse and my children. Society won't allow that anymore. Society has no authority to deny me my right to self-defense. That's one of the primary rights in all of the nature. Every animal has a right to self-defense, including to defend its nest or its wherever it lives, its hole in the ground. Has a right to defend what's necessary to sustain it. Our society we live under an arbitrary rule by law, not rule of law, and we've cast aside the ideal, the standard by which we used to measure and guide everything we do. We've thrown it asunder. And that's why we're in the trouble we're in. Now, I'm going to stop here. We're going to do part 5 next Tuesday, and then that'll be the end of this series. Next Tuesday, what I intend to do is expand on what our natural rights are and how they work and how they function when they are in conflict with each other or when they butt into each other. And we'll look at some of how, if you understand the system I've been trying to explain and describe, if you understand morality versus ethics, natural law, natural rights based on a creator-granted will, things like this, if you understand that, you're going to see that resolving a lot of our modern-day issues are actually very easy. I say this a lot. People don't like it. It's true. Right and wrong, moral right and wrong are easy. They're black and white. Living with that is the hard part. Living with the ramifications of what right and wrong is, that's hard for everybody. So when you are starting to see gray, that's an absolute sure sign you're on the wrong side of right. Because gray is our way of rationalizing away what we know to be wrong, justifying something we know to be a wrong. We start coming up with, well, it's gray, it's nuanced, it's more complicated than that. No, it's not. Moral right and wrongs, as long as you have a thought out, principled world system, are easy. It's living with it. Living with the ramification or the results of that right and wrong or the decisions you have to make. That's what we don't want to do. That's what becomes difficult for us as humans. And that's where we kick against the boards. So we'll go over some more of that next week. And if you have questions, specific examples and things like that, that's when we need to bring these next week. If you want, you can email them ahead of time. But otherwise, I'm going to invite the class to participate as much as possible next Tuesday so that we can go over any questions you have about how this system works. Because if our world were to operate under this system, and if public service was to this ideal, not to a party, not to self, not to necessarily a state or a county, but if public service was to this ideal within whatever area we represented, within my city, within my county, within my state, within the nation, if our service was to the ideal, we'd have a lot fewer problems and a lot fewer laws because you don't need them. They'd already be within the people. That's part of the problem. We don't want to do that. We're after control, not order. So that's where we're going to end today. Wrap up by thanking you for being here. Appreciate your participation in the class. I hope that this is helping some of you. I know that this is not going to be the most popular subject for a lot of people. Unfortunately, this is something that I would say should be mandatory in at least high school. There should be a section maybe an entire quarter at least, or a semester, based on this type of reasoning and arguing. We're just outlining it here. We could go into it in a lot more depth. But at the very least, this is something that should get a substantial amount of time in high school in a civics class or in a philosophy class, in my opinion. Probably something that's beat into our students over and over again through several years in school. Cover it in civics, cover it in philosophy, cover it in reasoning and critical thinking, logic classes. But we don't. Cover it in comparative theology, but we don't. And that's one of the reasons our society has so much trouble. We have no common idea. So I know it's not a common or a very popular subject, and nothing that's actually truly important and beneficial to us in this world actually is popular, because it requires work, requires effort, and then it requires us to adhere to what we're learning, which goes against what we want to do. We're happy to be that senseless, non-thinking animal that lives by emotion and instinct. We don't want to be that higher order, born from above spiritual being, because that too many restrictions. Too many restrictions. At least that's the way we see it. There are only restrictions if you're that animal. When you think of them that way, that's a good sign that you are that irrational feeling animal. When you see them as smart choices for a better life, well, now you're pursuing happiness, the moral and virtuous life, and you're going to understand joy the way Paul did. We'll cover it again next Tuesday. Tomorrow, I'm going to continue on the New Covenant by the numbers. Thursday, I'm thinking about going back to Bigfoot. I'll have to send T-Rex a message. And then Friday, the book, back to our book study. Until then, we love you. We thank you for being here. We appreciate everything. Email us if you want to talk to us. joe@theroadtoconcord.com. We'll get to you. I will see those of you who join us tomorrow. Natasha, we're out.